The storm began before lights out. Not the kind of storm that rattled windows and passed. No, this one sat above St. Abele Girls' College like something ancient had perched on the roof, breathing through the clouds. The thunder didn't roll, it growled. And each growl made the iron bunk beds vibrate. Chimamanda lay awake in her dormitory, clutching her thin hostel blanket. All around her, the other girls whispered the same fear under their breath. This kind of night, Madame Koikoi usually walks. The seniors told stories. The juniors believed them. But no one had ever heard her themselves. Not until tonight. At exactly 12:13 a.m., the lights flickered, then died. The dormitory fell into a darkness so thick it felt like cloth pressed over the eyes. And then, koi, koi, the sound wasn't loud. It wasn't rushed. It was deliberate, one heel at a time, echoing down the long concrete corridor. Someone gasped. Someone began to pray. Another girl pulled her bedsheet over her head as if cotton could stop a ghost. But Chimamanda froze, because she knew something the others didn't. 3 days earlier, she had found an old red shoe half buried behind the school kitchen. So old the heel was cracked, but so polished it still reflected light. Against her instincts, she had touched it. And when she touched it, something touched her back. A whisper, a breath, a presence. Ever since, she had been having dreams of a woman with blood-like lipstick, a crooked smile, and one red heel tapping on the tiled floor. Now that same tapping was moving closer. Koi, koi. This time louder. Closer. Slower. The girls huddled together at the far end of the room, but Chimamanda remained on her bed, unable to move, her heartbeat punching through her ribs. Then the door to the dorm creaked open, and the footsteps stopped. Silence. So heavy it pressed on the lungs. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from the darkness, "Where is my shoe?" Not shouted. Not whispered. It was the kind of voice that snakes into the ear and sits there. The seniors screamed first. The juniors followed. Bodies clashed, girls tripped over each other, the entire dorm became chaos. But Chimamanda didn't run, because the voice wasn't speaking to the dormitory. It was speaking to her, and she understood the terrible truth. Madame Koikoi wasn't haunting the school. She was looking for what Chimamanda had awakened. Then the footsteps resumed, except now, there was something different. The sound wasn't just koi, koi, now it was mismatched. One heel, one bare foot, koi, GBA, dragging, searching, coming. Lightning flashed, illuminating the doorway for a split second. And Chimamanda saw her. A tall, thin figure in a torn, wine-red gown. Hair long and tangled like river weeds, one elegant high heel clicking with each step. The other foot muddy, twisted, and bruised, as though it had been crushed in anger. Her face, oh, her face, smooth on one side, shattered on the other, like a mirror broken with a fist. Her smile stretched too wide. Her eyes were two burning coals of accusation. Madame Koikoi tilted her head slowly, unnaturally, endlessly, until her neck bones cracked one by one. Then she pointed at Chimamanda. "You touched it, so you heard me. And now, you must finish what they started." Before Chimamanda could understand what that meant, the windows exploded inward, shards of glass scattering across the floor. The room filled with a sudden cold wind that carried the smell of old perfume, dust, and blood. Madame Koikoi stepped into the dormitory fully, and all the other girls ran out screaming, every single one except Chimamanda. Because the spirit had pinned her to the bed without lifting a finger. Her voice, soft and venomous, curled around Chimamanda's ears. "The school lied to you all. Your teachers lied. Your seniors lied. I wasn't the monster in life, but someone among you is." She reached out a long, trembling hand. "Come, child. Let me show you what they did to me. Let me show you the truth buried under the hostel floor." Chimamanda tried to scream, but no sound came out. Madame Koikoi leaned closer, her shattered cheek brushing Chimamanda's ear. "And when you know, you will choose whom I must take." Just then, the corridor lights flickered once. And something else moved in the shadows behind Madame Koikoi. A second figure. Watching. Waiting. And that's when Chimamanda realized, Madame Koikoi was not the only spirit awake tonight. They would tell you she was born on a market day, as though that explained everything, that her life would always have the suddenness of a shouted bargain, the scent of ground nut oil, and the hard edges of commerce. Her name then was not Madame Koikoi, but Akwasi, some call her Ngozi in other tellings, a child in a crowded compound where doors never fully closed and secrets rode on the backs of errands. Her father was a potter who kept late hours shaping clay. Her mother sold second-hand books and told stories so alive the babies in the compound stopped crying to listen. From the beginning she had the small, fast movements of someone used to being noticed. She learned to walk between baskets and cooking fires without disturbing a single thing, and later people would say that in her steps there was always the exactness of a metronome, measured, deliberate, impossible to mistake. When she was little, an aunt gave her a pair of red shoes, a ridiculous thing for a girl who chased goats, but Akwasi treasured them. On the day she first wore them she clicked along the dusty lane and the sound made a child stop mid-chase. The sound stuck. Neighbors who hadn't paid attention to the potter's daughter now hummed the rhythm as they went about their work. The sound became her signature, a bright, sharp punctuation in the slow paragraphs of village life. People began to call her koikoi as if she'd always been named for the sound, not for breath or blood or prayer. She grew taller than most children in the compound, and with height came a voice that could be kind or cold depending on the day. She read everything she could lay hands on, old ministers' pamphlets, a banned novel hidden between the pages of a ledger, arithmetic books left by a traveling teacher. When the schools opened their doors to girls from the compound, Akwasi left the market for the first time. She moved with purpose. She learned to correct grammar like sharpening a knife. She learned to stand where she would be seen and not be interrupted. By her early 20s she had become a teacher, not by accident but by resolve. Teaching suited her like a uniform. It gave shape to her will. Her clothes changed, sober skirts, starched collars, and the occasional pair of red heels she saved for assembly day. She favored discipline the way some people favored prayer. Order, she told her students, is mercy. The girls who loved her saw a woman of principle. The girls who feared her saw a woman who could make shame look like justice. The school that employed her was the kind you find where the town meets the long roads, a boarding school with concrete dormitories and a chapel whose bell never sounded when it should. The place had rules that smelled of polish and unresolved sorrows. In one of those rules lay the beginning of everything that would come after, the insistence that good girls be small, quiet, and neatly contained. Akwasi, Madam as the students began to call her with a mixture of respect and an old, private trembling, saw the cracks in that mandate and filled them with consequence. She carried herself with the click of those red heels, koi, koi, a sound students learned to hear before they saw her. It became a heartbeat of the schoolyard. When she walked among the dorms at night, girls pretended they were asleep. When she stood before assembly, lines straightened as if by magnet. Her methods were strict. She administered punishments that fit the wrongdoings like gloves, detentions stretching into midnight chores, public correction that left a child smaller than she had been at dawn. Many of the punishments were old-fashioned and cruel in ways bureaucracy condoned, but human hearts remembered. Still, an older headmistress praised her efficiency. Exam scores climbed, the prefects obeyed without whisper, and the school's name began to carry weight in neighboring towns. Stories gathered around her like loose change. Some said she scraped a scar across a student's palm with a ruler for speaking out of turn. Others claimed she had once locked 3 girls in a storeroom overnight until they begged for forgiveness in the dark. The stories multiplied with the kind of certainty gossip breeds in places where people are always together and always watching. Yet there was another side the rumors never let sit long enough to study. Madame Koikoi could be unexpectedly tender. She mended uniforms that fell apart at the seams and sat beside girls who had lost parents until they slept. She smuggled books for those who loved to read. She could, in the space of a single hour, be guardian and tormentor, and this contradiction hardened the myth more than any single act. Her private life was a patch of cold shadows. She never married. There were whispers, a suitor who left, a promise that broke, a greed for respect in place of companionship. She kept a small tin chest beneath her mattress containing letters she refused to burn. Some nights she would sit with the letters, her heels set beside the bed as if shoes themselves could be comfort. The red shoes were polished until they shone like small, stubborn suns. Years passed. The school changed, but not entirely. New headmasters came and went. Some were thoughtful, some indifferent. If you asked an old gardener about Madame Koikoi's integrity, he would pull the hem of his shirt, stare at the ground, and say nothing. If you asked a prefect who had never been punished, she would smile politely and add that the woman demanded exactness, that the shape of a life should be neat and narrow. The students, who lived to exaggerate and survive, started telling the story that would turn into legend. That if you heard koi, koi, at midnight you should pull the blankets over your head and pray that you weren't the reason for her step. Then the first fracture appeared. A small, bureaucratic thing that could have been repaired with apologies and paperwork if it had been handled differently. A transfer request misfiled. A rumor of corruption about a teaching post. A note that refused to exist. A girl punished for stealing she insisted she did not steal. These were the kinds of human misunderstandings that, on ordinary nights, cause anger, apologies, and, later, forgetfulness. But within the walls of the boarding school, such things gather like dry leaves. You can tell this next part two ways: the modest truth and the version that sticks to teeth like caramel. The truth is this: Madame Koikoi made enemies. Not enemies in a heroic, political sense, but enemies the way a strict teacher earns resentment, quiet, corrosive, patient grievance that moves through whisper and small acts of malice. Someone sabotaged a test. Someone hid a letter. Someone lied in the right ear at the right time. Accusations followed. Investigations were suggested, then smothered. Her name, until then wrapped in the crisp collars of authority, began to taste like rumor. At first, she fought with administrative papers and sharp words. She appealed to the headmistress and to the school board with the same sternness she taught in class. She walked to meetings with her red heels and the koi the board members had learned to notice. But the board, weary of scandal and reputation, wanted quiet. Quiet is a commodity school's prize above truth. Discipline needed to be both seen and contained. Scandal needed to be stamped out. Then one afternoon everything accelerated. A student vanished from the dormitory for a single night. A note appeared in the headmaster's inbox alleging that Madame Koikoi had punished a pupil in a way that broke an unspoken boundary. Parents were called. Voices rose. The town smelled of gossip and legal threat. The school closed for a week while a committee was summoned. In those 7 days, the compound where the Potter's family lived saw friends stop visiting. They watched the house windows instead, like men waiting for a verdict. When the school reopened, some students had proofs and sworn accounts. Others had memories rearranged by fear and the desire to be believed. The board took action that satisfied outsiders. A suspension, a statement of regret, a quiet transfer to another region. People clapped their hands and moved on. The official record was thin and careful, the sort of document that covers consequences without naming reasons. But in the corners where human hearts keep their receipts, something else took root. The kind of story that will not be held by minutes and minutes of boardroom silence. What happened next is what the town remembers with a mixture of dread and ritual. They remember a night of shouting, a rainstorm beaten by the wind, the lanterns blown out as if the air itself had chosen to stop seeing. They remember a group of students whose fingers were like fingers of accusation. They remember a pair of red shoes left by a latrine and the way the heels had been chipped as if by frantic stamping. They remember how, after that night, the school felt different, the hallways narrower, the tiles colder, the dormitory doors heavier. Some girls claimed they began to hear koi when there was nobody in the corridor. Others said they woke with pages of letters spread over their chests, letters none of them could read and no one had put there. Teachers who had once defended Madame Koikoi fell silent. Those who had once been indifferent now avoided meeting her eyes. Madame Koikoi herself changed in ways everyone noticed. She became thinner. Her laughter, before so quick and precise, slowed and tasted like iron. She stopped polishing her shoes for a while and kept them hidden. She started talking to students less and standing in the chapel more. There were nights she walked the dormitory in socked feet, listening to the boards, learning the rhythms of the place as if she were learning a song she had once sung and now needed to remember. Then came the night they say was the last. There are 100 versions of what happened because, in the end, people prefer versions that make sense of their fears. Some say the students found her in the cloakroom. Others say she stormed the prefect's table and humiliated them until they struck back. A few older witnesses remember a scream, so sharp it shattered a window, and the moon looked away. Someone set down a report at the police booth. Someone else tore it up. The headmistress cried in the garden where no one could see her shoulders shaking. After that night, books went missing from the library, not only scandalous ones, but slow books about law and kindness. The compound where the Potter's family lived had a burned patch of earth where a small fire had been lit and quickly smothered. The tin chest under her mattress was found, not by the police, but by a student who swore she had magic in her pockets, opened and emptied. The red shoes were discovered in the latrine the next morning, heel chipped, mud on one side as if someone had dragged the foot through clay. Madame Koikoi did not come to class the following Monday. She did not answer the bell. She did not come to the boardroom where officials argued about what to write in the minutes. She simply ceased to appear. For a while, people propped up explanations. She had left town. She was taking a long leave to tend to sick relatives. She had been hospitalized. The headmistress sent polite letters. The prefects wrote a note saying she'd resigned. Those were tidy versions for tidy people. But the students, the ones who still had to sleep in the dormitory every night, knew the truth in their bodies. They began to count their breaths when the lights went out. They learned to listen for that familiar rhythm one heel made on the stone steps. Koi, koi, a sound that could be ordinary and awful at the same time. Sometimes, in the dark, the heel sound would come with a dragging, a wet, uneven pull that didn't belong to human gait. Soon, whispers turned to instructions and instructions to dares. A game in the dormitory would be, leave the red shoe at the end of the corridor and run back to your bed. Or, in the dead hour, stand by the window and call her name. Some girls dared each other to scrape the polished heel across a dormitory tile and count how long it took until the next sound answered. Then the real change arrived. Not rumor, not misplaced letters, but action. At midnight, lights would flicker. Doors would open from inside though no hand was seen. The prefects reported the sound of heels in the chapel when the chapel was locked. Girls complained of being tapped on the shoulder by a hand that felt as cold as dishwater. A few brave ones claimed they had seen a woman walk through the dormitory in a torn red dress, her heel clicking on one foot and the other foot bare and bruised, trailing wet footprints no one could explain. Teachers called this hysteria. Parents blamed imagination. The headmistress tried to reassure them with a letter about stress and exam season. But boarders who once slept soundly began waking in a sweat, pillows wet, voices tangled in the dark with words that weren't theirs. Objects moved on their own accord. A ruler here, a letter there, a broom swept across a corridor with no hand guiding it. Someone put down a bowl of plantain slices at the dormitory door and the next morning they were eaten. Another girl swore a red ribbon had been braided into her hair overnight, though she remembered never wearing red. By the time the sound of koi became nightly, the story had left the realm of rumor and moved into ritual. Mothers stopped sending daughters to that school for a while. Some came back with new respect for old fears. The town developed a superstition: never stroll the lane alone after the lanterns go out, and never, under any circumstance, take a red shoe unless you intend to learn whose it is. And yet, this is important for the story I will continue. Even as the dormitory began to learn her pattern, even as the teachers whispered about mass hysteria and the prefects posted watch rosters, there were edges of her that the girls could not explain away. She was not merely a punishment carried on hollow heels. Sometimes the sound of her step was patient, as one might hear the slow breathing of someone who has waited a long time. Sometimes the click was playful, as if she remembered how to laugh through a mouth that had learned to order. Sometimes there would be only one drag, a shameful slither that suggested something had been left unfinished. And always, there was the pulling curiosity in the air, the sense that the school itself kept a secret the moon wanted to know. In the weeks after she disappeared, a new economy of fear and commerce grew. Prefects sold charms and students traded talismans. Teachers avoided the third-floor corridor. The chapel bell was rung 3 times every evening as if it might stitch the night back together. People marked off the days when they heard her, as if counting might buy them immunity. The tale of Madame Koikoi, once a name for a woman with red shoes, had begun its slow transformation into a thing that walked when the lights went out. It was no longer only about a woman who had been strict, or a woman whose life had been tangled with the petty cruelties of an institution. It had become a story with teeth. And so the dormitory learned to listen. But before we reach the reason everyone keeps asking about, the why of her return, the truth tucked under floor tiles and behind locked records, there is one scene worth sitting with. It is the night when a single student, a girl who had never been brave before, left a small scrap of paper beneath the chapel door. She wrote, with hands that trembled, "Greater than if you are still here, tell me your name. Tell me if you are in pain. Tell me what you need." She slid the paper into the crack, then ran back to her bed. The paper flew inward on a sudden draft and vanished under the heavy door like a thing swallowed. Minutes later, the corridor filled with the slow, unmistakable sound of one high heel and one dragging foot coming from the chapel, closer, closer, until the girl who had written the note could feel the air press against her face. The next morning, the paper lay on her pillow. On it, in a hand she did not recognize, a single word had been written. The ink was old and the stroke was not quite human. But I will stop here, before the explanation, before the reason, before the opening of the cupboard that will let the quiet things climb out. The story is longer than one telling and crueler than a single night. When you want the next part, when you want the why, I will tell you how the secret is found, whose hands held the first lie, and what it demands in return.